All right, people. Chag Sameach. Let's do a Hallel.
It's not your business, right?
We're on page 316. Feel free to move closer if you want to, but I'm not going to force anyone to.
That was
leave for space. Huh?
That was pre-COVID.
I understand. 316. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לקרוא את ההלל.
Amen. Baruch atah asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu
Amen. Hallelujah. 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 Avdei Adonai. Hallelujah. Et Shem Adonai. Ishem Adonai mevorach. Me'ata v'yad olam. B'zach shemesh ad mevorach. Mehula Shem Adonai. Rama kol goyim Adonai. Ala shamayim kerodov. Mikadonai Eloheinu, המקביל השבת, המשביל לראות, בשמיים ובארץ, מקימי ועבדת, בהשפות ימים עליון, לא שיבים נדיבים, נדיבי עמו, מושיבי עקרת הבית. הם הבנים סליחה, הללויה. וצאת ישראל ממצרים, ליעקב מים לועז, הייתה יהודה לקודשו, ישראל ממשלותיו, היה נוס הירדן, יזוב כסף וזהב, מעשה ידי אדם, פה להם לא ידברו, עיניים להם לא יראו, אוזניים להם לא ישמעו, אף להם לא יראו, ידיהם לא מישון, רגליהם לא יחלקו, לא יהגו בגרונם, כמוהם יהיו עושיהם כל אשר בוטח בהם. Sabatach Adonai Eslamu Maginamu, Veidaron Betchuv Adonai Eslamu Maginamu, Irei Adonai Betchuv Adonai Eslamu Maginamu, Adonai Zecharanu Yivarech, Yivarech Beit Yisrael, Yivarech Beit Aharon, Yivarech Yirei Adonai. קטנים גדולים יעזב אדוני עליכם עליכם ועל בניכם ברוכים אתם אדוני עושה שמיים וארץ שמיים אדוני והארץ נתן לבני אדם לא המתים יהללויה ולא כל יודעי תרומה ואנחנו לבעיה מעתה ועד עולם מעתה ועד עולם הללויה. Text 3:18 אהבתי כי ישמע אדוני קולי תחנוני כי היית אוזנו לי ויאמר יקרא ורבוני דברי אלוהי מוות ומצרי שול מצאוני שובי נפשי לנוחי כי אדוני כי חילצת נפשי ממוות מדירה את רגלי מדרכי אני עמדתי בחופשי כל העולם כוזב מעדיף לאדוני כל תגלוי עלי קודש ישוע דסה בשם אדוני אקרא ולעד אדוני שלם נגדה לכל עמו יקע בעיני אדוני מפתה לחסידיו אנא אדוני אנא אדוני כי אני עבדך אנא אדוני אדוני כי אני עבדך אני עבדך בן אמתך אני עבדך בן אמתך אני עבדך בן אמתך פיתחת למוסרה לך אזבח זבח תודה בשם אדוני יקרא ודאי לאדוני שלם נגדך נא לכל עמו בחצרות בית אדוני בתוככי ירושלים הללויה הללויה את אדוני כל גויים שבחו שבחו כל העמים כי עלינו חסו בעיני אדוני לעולם הללויה
Adonai ki tov, ki leolam tov. Mirameisa karatia, alani barnechaya, Adonai li lo'ira, ma'asei adam, Adonai li be'ozai, bani eres onai, tov lechasot b'Adonai, mitoach b'adam, tov lechasot b'Adonai, mitoach b'dim, kol goyim sebavuni, b'shem Adonai ki amilam, sabuni gam sabuni, b'shem Adonai ki amilam, sabuni kevolim doshim kejosim, b'shem Adonai ki amilam. Lay 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 Yemin Adonai, Osachayir, Yemin Adonai, Ronema, Yemin Adonai, Osachayir, Lo Amur, Ki Yecheh, Asaper Maseyah, Yasu Yisoniyam, Sha'arei tzedek, Ahavam odeyah, Zeh Hashanah Adonai tzadikim, Wait, no, sorry. Shalom Adonai Tzadikim Yavo. Odechai Ki Anitani Batei Li Yeshua. Odechai Ki Anitani Batei Li Yeshua. Masu Avoni Aitale Roshina Masu Avoni Aitale Roshina Meitadonai Aitazor Yiddy, Ana Adonai Hoshiana.
Ana Adonai Hoshiana.
Ana Adonai Hoshiana.
Ana Adonai Hoshiana.
Ana Adonai Hatzlichana.
Ana Adonai Hatzlichana.
Ana Adonai Hatzlichana.
Ana Adonai Hatzlichana.
Baruch haba b'shem Adonai ve'irachnuchem mibeit Adonai. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai ve'irachnuchem mibeit Adonai. El Adonai v'ya'alanu v'yisrucha ba'avotim ad karnot hamizbeach. El Adonai v'ya'alanu v'yisrucha ba'avotim ad karnot hamizbeach. Eli ata ve'odeka Elohai Avromeka. Eli ata ve'odeka Elohai Avromeka. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chazor. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chazor. צדיקים עושה רצונך בכל עמך בית ישראל ברינה יודו ויברכו וישבחו ויפארו וירוממו ויריצו ויקדישו וימליכו את שמך מלכנו כי לך טוב להודות ולשמך נא לזמר כי מעולם עד עולם אתה ברוך אתה אדוני מלך בעולם ותשבחו
אמן. חג שמח, יישר כוח.
So people into a little bit of study.
Yes.
See,
You're not gonna like heal over yet.
Hashem gives him koach.
So, the last couple of years I've really had Dad puts out this amazing booklet every year. I've read through the whole thing and I think there's some really good stuff in there. There's different directions we could go, but I think go on, Brian. Notice the ground. And obviously take these with you and you can look at the stuff that we don't look at today together. One of the things that always fascinates me about Pesach is the idea of the Magid and the storytelling, but that the story is not just storytelling, it's a ritual, how story and ritual kind of interact with each other. And there's a section in here that I think has some really great sources at looking at that. So maybe let's say a bracha for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So the piece that I thought we could look at is it's designed as a Havruta piece, but it's from a course called Project Zug, which is one of the things that Hadar does as Havruta learning. It's on page 36. And what's interesting, I mean, most of us have been going to Seder's for years and we're familiar with the Haggadah, but what's interesting is how the Mishnah was sort of like how bits of the Haggadah come from the Mishnah. Everyone remember what the Mishnah is? Do we need to recap? What's the Mishnah, Daniel?
This is the first 6 orders that Rabbi Akiva brought down and explains all of the different laws in its earliest form.
Great. So, I mean, Judaism was an oral tradition for generations and generations. Teachers would just pass on the knowledge to students, and it was all essentially interpretation of the main text, which of course was the text of the Torah. And there were lots of different traditions and interpretations, and eventually it was sort of codified as the Mishnah in approximately the year 200 CE by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi in Sipori in northern Israel. And as Daniel said, there are 6 orders, the second one of which is called Mo'ed, which deals with all of the holidays. And so Pesachim obviously deals with stuff to do with Pesach, and a lot of it is about the Pesach sacrifices. But when we get to chapter 10, there's some different ideas that come in. And so just think when we look at this, what I'd like to do is look at this first source together, which is a long source, 2 different Mishnahs, Mishnah 5 and 6 from chapter 10 of Pesachim. And then if people feel up to it, it would be really great to look at sources 2 and 3, one of which is from the Tosefta, which I'll say more about when we get there, one of which is from the Haggadah itself, and to compare those 2 stories. But first, let's look at the Mishnah. It would be great if someone else would like to read. If we can read it in Hebrew, then we can translate. Anyone feel like they want to read this Mishnah?
I'll read the coming.
Zeph, you want to read it?
The second cup is poured.
Well, I said I prefer, if we can read it in English too, but I'd love to hear the Hebrew too, because do you feel comfortable reading the Hebrew?
No, I'll butcher some of the words.
I'll try.
Go ahead.
Mazgulo Chosheni, V'chan haben shoel aviv, V'im ein da'at baben, aviv melamdo.
Okay, so let's stop there for a second.
Okay.
So this Mazgulo Kosheni, right? So we know obviously but Mazgu is an interesting word because it seems to be that there were potentially like servants at the Seder or something, but there was, we don't know, but the point is that as the second cup is poured, Haben Shoel Aviv, the son asks his father, Im ein da'at baben. Da'at is a kind of comprehension or consciousness. If the son doesn't have consciousness to ask the question, then the father will teach the son. And what does he say? Okay, so far, I think familiar to everybody, right? So the first, how is this night different? Matzah, chametz, everybody's eating matzah. Okay, Right, good. Everyone's every other night we eat all kinds of other vegetables, like we eat raw. Familiar so far. But this one might be a little different.
שבכל אלו אנו אוכלים בשר צלי. That's different. בשר צלי שלוק. ומבושל. הלילה הזה כולו צלי.
So this is obviously not in the Haggadah, but it's saying that on all other nights we can eat our meat however we want it to be, right? It can be roasted, it can be sli is roasted, shaluk, kind of in some kind of stewy type thing, umuvushal, just cooked. Livshal means to cook. So halayla hazeh kulo sli. And this night we have to have a roasted lamb on a spit, which is what the tradition insists on, okay?
שבכל אלו אנו מטבילים פעם אחת. הלילה הזה שתי פעמים.
Okay, so, and then the third one about the two dipping. So,
Yeah.
how many questions are there?
4.
Are
לפי דעתו של בן.
Isn't that 5?
Okay.
Oh no, there's no leaning in it, right? So
Yeah.
it is still 4. So I guess that in the Haggadah itself, the meat question got changed to a leaning question.
Yeah. ולפי דעתו של בן, אביו ילמדו.
So it's translated here, and according to the cognitive abilities of the son, the father teaches him. So let's pause for a moment and just, I mean, this isn't so radically new. I think most of us know all of this, but like that, this idea of according to the son's ability, the father teaches him, or the parent teaches their child. But the interesting part is how what follows is actually answering the questions, or if it's answering the questions at all. So we can look at it. Maybe, Bonnie, we can just carry on in English a little bit of this.
From where do you want me to start? He begins
Yeah.
with the negative. He, the father, begins with the negative and ends with the positive. And he teaches the passage from, my father was a wandering Armenian, until he finishes the whole section.
So this idea of gnut, which means shame or degradation, and shevach, which means praise, translated here as negative and positive. So the idea that we begin telling the story about, in a way that's talking about the degradation of our ancestors, but finishes with the praise, right? And then this whole section is taught from the book of Deuteronomy, which is the whole idea of the wandering Aramean, that whole section. So what is that section, and why? How does that become part of the story? What is that section of my father was a wandering Aramean? And why do we? Maybe we should look at it in the Torah. It's just such a curious way to tell the story. Because where would you think the obvious place to tell the story would be from?
With Moshe and his non-existence in the Haggadah.
But I mean, if you were saying, okay, we're going to tell the story of the Exodus, where would you tell the story from?
I started with Ur.
Huh?
We started with Abraham, came from Ur.
Right.
We did that
Yeah.
prequel.
But are you saying you started Egypt when you
I mean,
approached the Pharaoh?
I don't know. I mean, but yeah, you'd think you could tell the story by actually telling the Exodus story
Right.
from the book of
Yeah.
Exodus.
Yeah.
But it's like this whole, how far back do you go, and what is the story, and how is this, in terms of a parent teaching a child about the importance of the story? How does it? Who is the wandering Aramean? Who?
Would it be Joseph?
Abraham?
Joseph. Huh?
Is it Abraham?
No, isn't it Jacob?
Yeah.
Jacob.
Go look. That's like,
What?
oh look.
Hey. Good.
Alright, so now,
See? We sang Hallel, we're just learning a little bit.
Oh, we could ask him.
Who's the one who Aramaic?
Yeah, who was the one who
Wasn't it? Abraham? Is that the question of the day?
Yeah, it's in this book, if you want to grab, well, let's see.
Thank you.
It's his first birthday. Well, maybe let's look at the story in the Chumash a little bit.
Golly is great.
I
page are
don't
you
think
on?
I'm on, I found, is it Exodus 26:5?
Yeah.
No, it's Deuteronomy. I mean, does anyone know the context of when this is all being said? Because it's if we're talking about the Seder as like ritualized storytelling, this is actually another ritualized story. What's the mitzvah that's being described here? It's a very powerful ritual because it's the whole idea when you enter into the land. You have your first fruits and you put them into a basket, right? So you can see it's the beginning of Parshat Ki Tavo, which is Deuteronomy 26. So you fill this basket with your beautiful first fruits that you've grown in the land, and then the priest takes the basket from your hand and puts it on the altar, and then it says Va'anita va'amata lifnei Adonai Elohecha, and you answer, and then you tell this story as if you're saying, like, I'm bringing my first fruits in the land and I'm telling this story. And then it's Arami Oved Avi. My father was a fugitive Aramean, and it's not. It's
11:41.
Sorry, I'm feeling quite spacey. If I'm not making any sense, then you'll forgive me. But so it's not clear who the story is about, and we'll get back in a minute to the text in the Mishnah. But it's just when it says there's a note in the Chumash here that says my father could refer to Jacob because he went down to Egypt. It could be collective, referring to Jacob's entire family who went with him, or it could refer to all the ancestors, Abraham and Isaac as well as Jacob and his sons. And then Aramean probably refers to the fact that the ancestors of Israelites came from the region known as Aram, blah, 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 blah. But the point is, the fact that the Mishnah and then the Haggadah chooses this point to tell the story, I think has some meaning, which I'd love to see if anyone has any thoughts about. Like, how is this? If we're supposed to, as we're going to see in a minute, like see ourselves in this story, how is telling this story in this way do that?
Did we confirm that what is it talking about Yaakov or potentially?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Well, we were talking last night. Well, starting the story there and then going to Yosef, his journey to Egypt, and kind of starting the story before the Hebrews were slaves. Starting with the wandering, Armenian, and Joseph's story and how his role in enslaving all of Egypt, turning them into indentured servants. So just kind of shapes. It's as with all stories, the prequel, this what
Yeah.
leads to something is an essential, we could take a small bit of anything and, oh, we were slaves, now we're free. That's kind of the small bit, in a way, or an important big bit, of course, but, what just expands the learning possibilities, the lesson is maybe why they started there.
And they're also really clear that it needs to start from a place of what they ganud, which is this degradation or subjugation. So we're starting this place that it wasn't the beginnings weren't easy. We don't go into we come from such a great lineage, which is also sort of part of the storytelling. But telling that, how does that answer the child's 4 questions? Does it answer the child's 4 questions? Not at all, right? So then it continues on, right? Rabban Gamliel, and this we see exactly word for word in the Haggadah itself, but the Mishnah carries on. Rabban Gamliel haya me'kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu b'Pesach lo yatsa yedei chapato. So Rabban Gamliel says, if you haven't taught these 3 things on Pesach, then you haven't fulfilled the obligation, right? Elohem Pesach matzah maror, right? And then this is all exactly in the Haggadah, and with these explanations. But does this answer the 4 questions?
No.
The maror level, the matzah level?
Not fully. I don't know if the 4 questions were at all meant to be answered.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
But in the Mishnah here, that's what we just read. It says, he asks the questions, and one of them that is not in that Haggadah is about roasted meat. But the Mishnah says, Lefi dato shel ben aviv melamdo, according to the cognitive abilities of the son, the father teaches him. So I guess it's the fact that the language is just that the parent is supposed to teach the child is not necessarily answering the questions. It's just the questions are about, okay, this child has curiosity, and I'm going to teach in the way I'm going to teach, right?
Yeah, not answering the questions, but just giving more story and
Yeah.
pointing at certain things, giving tools to figure out the questions, maybe.
I guess.
It's interesting. It feels like this is an example of the kid trying to approach this at one level, and the words aren't really reaching the level, and the level is I want to understand more of what's going on. Can you tell me more about this? And the words are why do we do dipping this specific way? And the parent's I'm going to skip through all the words that you're saying and just get to the heart of the matter, which is you actually just want to learn more about this. So I'm going to teach you the really important things, which aren't actually about why we dip twice. It's the story itself.
Yeah. I love that. And it is then how somehow the Mishnah it's very playful, because it is about how ritual and storytelling sort of coexist. Because we've got the rituals, it's we don't necessarily need to know why we do the rituals, but we're telling the story and we're performing the rituals all at the same time. And then the Mishnah concludes with this section, which some of us have been talking a lot about this year. In every generation, a person needs to see it themselves as if they had themselves come out of Egypt. And then it says, "Shlema v'higadata levincha b'yom ha'u lemor v'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeiti miMitzrayim lefichach אנחנו חייבים להודות להלל לשבח ולבאר לא רומם להדר לברך לעלה ולקלס ולמי שעשה לאבותינו ולנו כל הניסים האלו הוציאנו ממצרים לחירות מיגון לשמחה ומאבל ליום טוב ולמאפלה לאור גדול ומשעבוד לגאולה ונאמר לפניו hallelujah. So all of that is exactly word for word in the Haggadah, but it's interesting that it comes into the Mishnah. So if you look at the questions that Dina Weiss, who's one of the Haggadah teachers, asks, The first question she says in the, someone else read the first question.
In the Mishnah, we see the questions of the Manishtana. Do these questions ever get answered? If so, how? If not, how do we understand the role of asking these questions?
So we kind of talked about that a bit. I think that's what Simon was saying just now. But any other thoughts about that? I think there's a bit more to say, but there's definitely something about the role of asking questions.
I mean, in some ways, the questions that are asked are quite simple. It might be like a pedagogical tool to support Jews in explaining the ritual of Pesach to people.
More Hallel, less Havruta.
Yeah.
There's a question. He's asking a question.
Just like it might be a way of helping us, like when we get too lost in the complexity of what Pesach is, it might help us like zoom out and remember what the simplicity is, and also help us explain the essence of what this holiday is to people who are not Jewish, potentially.
Yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts about that?
Well, just in one way, though they're not answered, but because they involve like things, so the things themselves are answers because you know with springtime you sense, right? You use your other senses, so you see with matzah that you're only eating this type of bread, so you have the sense that okay, you're like unleavened, right? You're not. So same with the maror. It's like you could taste the bitterness. So in a way that sensation is the answer, and like you don't. It's one of those things you don't have to explain because somebody understands it because they're
So
sensing.
it's more visceral.
Yeah, this.
Nice. Yeah. Anyone else? Let's look at her second question.
Before we go,
Yeah, go ahead.
one quick thing is, have we talked about the correlation between the questions and the children?
Not yet.
Okay, is that a thing that we're gonna do? Cool. I'd
Yeah.
love to do it now.
Go for it.
I think it's really interesting because 4 is like not that normal of a number in liturgy, except for like seasons, I guess. But like here we have 2 instances of 4, and they're like back to back, which to me is inviting. Like, let's try to see if they match up in any way. And I'm wondering, like, does anybody feel like there is a matchup that makes sense?
You mean matching one of the 4 children to one of the 4 questions?
Yeah. Like Maror could go with the bitter one, like the wicked child, because he asks a question that makes everybody die. And that's like the second thing, right? Because the first one's matzah and the second one's Maror.
I also think of it as 4 by 4, so you each one you match one, so you get a 4 by 4 grid.
Oh.
So right, so then you can like
Each kid
Yeah,
asks the
has-
same question.
yeah. Oh no, each has all 4.
Right.
Just like right in each of us is all 4.
Yeah.
So same.
The numbers are interesting because actually, in other versions of the Mishnah, I thought this had that, but it doesn't have the dipping question. But there's actually 5 questions. The Mishnah here doesn't have. It has 4 questions, but one of them is about on all other nights we can eat meat roasted or boiled or whatever, but this night we have to have it roasted. And then in other versions of the Mishnah, you get also the dipping question. So it's actually not 4 questions at all; it's 5 questions. But it became obviously fixed as 4 questions without the meat questions. So. But anyway, to your point, are you suggesting that the wise child might be matzah and the wicked child might be
Maror, yeah.
maror?
Yeah.
So then the tam would be
Meat.
meat or
What are the what's the third question in the Marsh? The dipping.
And then there's leaning, which is not in here.
Leading is not in here. So leading would be,
The one who doesn't know how to ask.
yeah, what who doesn't know the answer. Interesting. Interesting theory.
Because I think of the one who doesn't know how to ask usually as like someone with like cognitive challenges. Like leaning feels like it could line up with that.
Wow.
I don't know. And matzah feels like the central piece to ask questions about in some ways.
It is a stretch.
Yeah, it is a stretch, but I like it.
It's a good stretch. It's nice. Is it something you've heard about or read about anywhere else, or you just like it just coming to you now?
I feel like I've talked about this at some point before, but I don't remember where.
Because
And I haven't like thought about it in years.
Yeah. Because of course there's also 4 cups of wine.
Right.
Going back to the wandering Armenian, I think one of the commandments, when I think of all of the commandments, some that resonate are sort of the respect we're supposed to have for our parents. And so maybe Father just means collectively, just so we don't forget all of our ancestors. So we always start and remember them, just like when we have our Jewish name, it's always, or Hebrew name, relates back to the generation before, and so we're bringing in collectively ourselves as a people when we think of all of our generations that came before us. Just another stretch.
Yeah, I mean, so many of the stories that we tell are related to other generations, and the way in which we are a product of where we've come from in so many different ways. And so if the obligation is to see the author, that's more to see ourselves inside the story. You know, the fact that we're attaching ourselves to this very particular story and seeing ourselves as part of it through our lineage, which could go back to all of, to Abraham and Sarah and whatever, but also to our own ancestors. It's one of the things someone was saying last night. I was saying that, one of the things that we do here often when we have people, when they have a yard site and they share like a story of their ancestor, which is the ways in which those stories become intertwined into the essence of who we are.
Even at birth, when we have a bris, like we pass the baby, when we have funeral, it's imperative that we all act in the burial directly. But then last night we were talking a little bit about trauma, and generational trauma, and so this is a pretty traumatic story to be embittered in this situation for so long, and why do we keep bringing it back up? How does it come and filter down through our own genes? Think of all the work that we talk about generational trauma, and we try to heal. We're not healing. We keep bringing it back up.
Yeah. Well, maybe that is the only way we can heal. Let's look at, see if that second question that she asked here is relevant, and then I'd love to look at these other 2 sources, which is a whole different thing, which is also, I think, connected to ritual and storytelling at the same time, but they're very interesting comparing these 2 stories. Actually, I guess she's got a lot of questions. Forget that. Let's just look. What I'd love to do is
if people are up for it, just to do this in Havruta, just if you want to just learn with somebody, just turn to somebody and just learn these two texts. So Tosefta, just to give you a little context, there was the way I see this is like there's all of these teachings around this period, the first 2 centuries of CE, and there's like all of these teachings, and when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi like edited together the Mishnah, it's like there's all this stuff that didn't make it into the Mishnah, which is called the Tosefta. So it's like from the same period, but it's not actually part of the Mishnah. And it's very interesting to look at those and how they're similar and how they're different. So this is also from the 10th chapter, but not from the Mishnah itself, but from Tosefta. And it tells this really interesting story about Rabban Gamliel, and then the story that we're familiar about with the 4 people in Bnei Barak, which is from the Haggadah itself. And I'd just love to pause for a moment because I need to stop talking and have you just read these 2 versions of similar but not exactly the same story, and just see how they're similar and how they're different, and what they might teach us about ritual and spirituality. I think they do have something important to say. And there are 3 questions on the following page. Is that clear?
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
They should have started there. I wonder if you had a delicious dessert, it's not a bunch of sugar, so it's sugar, right? But if you're just eating matzah, like, then maybe it's more inclined to skip all that stuff.
Still be out.
Okay, I guess the thing that is different here is this piece of like, even if it's just you, or just you and one student.
These people are just, this is, we have a contest the matzah. We don't have delicious.
I wonder if the whole night means
You can have these yummy things before that.
I wonder if the whole night is easy until midnight or strange kind of things in the Torah.
Yeah.
That'll be my convenience.
What's the beer? So facing each other.
And the CS is different from because it's done. So CS is all done. The second argument is, study all, just long in I asked them to study. Still like,
That's kind of
use that as a
This is just the story. Maybe you know,
hear reversed the story. Right, exactly.
Unless you're a rabbi.
Yeah.
You know, you're not gonna lie. I mean, I don't.
Seems like it's
Yeah,
very
I know.
formal.
But I don't.
That's not interesting. Interesting.
Yeah,
It's
I know.
just that
Yeah,
it's-
let's talk about that.
Like the guys that
At the Seder, we talked about why do we
It was actually when we arrived.
I think that's interesting.
And that's the only issue.
Really cool is the second question here. You know, the next page. It says, it seems that when first studying laws on Joseph to the story. But then, both of them, they come and they tell the story of this job. And then they went into so both of these are still saying the really important things.
Yeah.
That's fun song.
It reminds me of like the spiral staircase. This is passive, back to passive, but every year we're different. And every year it's different. Returning to the same grade, but you're changing as you go. You can actually budge the
Zeb, New York. I have a grandson named New York. No, I didn't have a grandson. That's the two hardest consonants to say. But Zeb was, well, Zeb is a, it's not too common either, and also I have a Sunday letter, and English was donated, always understand. Well,
When did the
so when I get more, we should just find.
Yeah, I realized.
It's also like this. This one is really focusing on just like kind of why and how it's so important to tell the story. They both have like the idea of like saying the story off and on. But this one is.
This one is just half the story, but this one's about the laws.
I was just noticing that in my table, the part each person talks about that
Like,
really elevate new
I do think there is like a specific reason
emotions
as to why they added, I think to look at the time, was like,
so much detail.
with matzah, nuts and dates,
That's
and not having
that was his portion. And so for Moshe, telling that part of the story, you're saying all the words, but
Yeah,
to do with that, fast forward, but that's the part
But
where
anyway,
people,
thank you.
yeah, hold on back to cross.
Right, that's
Your
okay.
gates.
Yeah, I mean, if everybody can get to a different view of this.
I just think it's fascinating, and I've never heard this idea of like staying up until the cops crow. It's like staying up until like sunrise.
Well, that's one that.
Page.
And shit, I'm just saying I never really hear the language of cops crow.
Precise
Yeah.
relationship
That was unique for me.
and
That
tell the
was
story of
And how they decided, because it's very, very different to
Ken.
in the first story. They only know it's morning because they hear the
right.
students come on to stuff and those stuff. I would like us to talk about because I think it's for me it was interesting
It's a bad thing
You used to have
how that is
no sleeves.
That was it.
how it's related to ritual practice.
It's funny.
I'm trying.
Should we bring it back together a little bit and just wind this up? I would love to. As Daniel just pointed out, where's the comment about
Yeah, page 38.
where it says about the relationship between
The precise relationship between the Mishnah and the Tosefta is a hot topic of modern scholarship.
So, in other words, like how it was decided what got in and what didn't get in. So the fact that the version that we know with the four rabbis in Bnei Barak staying up all night is the one that we're really familiar with, but the one from the Tosefta is very, very different. So where did you guys go in your discussions about all of that? What was the essence of what you guys were talking about, Simon, Cynthia, and Jay?
We just really like the questions that
Yeah.
asked, and realized like the first one's talking about laws and the second one's talking about the story, but at the end of the day they both come home with a story.
Right.
And it's a very similar story, but the interesting piece is that even though the first one's like the laws are the important bit, and here's how we'll get you to remember that the laws are the important bit by telling you a story, which is like, yeah, clearly actually the story's the good stuff.
And the idea that it's an obligation, because Larry said you have to. Did you just say you have to finish your Seder by midnight?
It's not so till 11, right?
Yeah, that's so.
But here it's saying you have to study all night long. Did you not study all night long?
Well, I never tried that.
I feel like
But so on the one hand, it's about law, like Simon's saying, but it's also about this idea of staying up all night to really, really get into this in a much deeper way. But what's the? I mean, to me, what is the most fascinating part of these two stories is how the qualitative difference of how they become aware that it's morning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyone want to say anything about that?
That's what they said happened, right?
why is that interesting to
I've got lots of reasons, but I want to hear if it's interesting. If it's not interesting to anyone else, then I'll tell you why it's interesting to me.
So, okay, so, yeah, go ahead. 'Cause we
What I find interesting is like in a family, when siblings are remembering and reminiscing, sometimes a sibling will tell a story and everybody else was like, I have no memory of that. We believe her, but we didn't store it, And so this is the same story in my mind. Both of it happened, the crow and the students, and just different people are storing it differently and remembering it differently. And we just trust, yeah, that's the part I forgot, but you remembered it.
It also brings me to the question of like, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. And like our teachers, the time has come. Like that is such a better story than like, oh, it's morning. You know? And so like, it to me feels like maybe the first thing that actually happened was they just like studied until the rooster and they're like, oh dang. But then somebody came up with this way better story of the students rushing in.
In what ways is it better?
There's an audience, a human audience being like, I can't believe you guys stayed up all night. Which like is a huge part of why anything is fun. To have somebody be like, I can't believe this happened to you.
So the difference being like the rooster, the day kind of breaks, nature awakens them to that it's been all night, versus like there's students coming in to let them know it's time to recite the Shema.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I think there's a big, difference there. Kind of don't exactly know, but that's how I interpret just like the nature awakening, going all night until the birds wake them up, or let them know that it's the transition has come for students. So I do find them different in a way, and being attuned to the sound of the birds, versus the calls in prayer. I don't know.
I mean, I think to me they're both hinting at the importance of, once you're aware of it being morning, of ritual that comes with that, of the spiritual practice that comes with that. Right? So it's just interesting to me that one in the Birkot HaShachar, in the morning blessings, one of the things you say is, which is you have given the rooster. It's a different word in that blessing. It's usually sechvi. Here it's actually gever, which is really interesting because that also means human. But the idea that you have imbued something in the natural world with the intelligence to make distinctions between night and day. And so here we are, we've been up all night, and suddenly we hear this sound from nature that is telling us that it's actually morning. And so what do they do? They immediately get up and go to the house of study. What they're going to do there, we don't know. I mean, it says very much Beit HaMidrash. So they've been studying all night. They're going to go and continue their studies, or they're going to go and put on, probably not put on tefillin, but they're going to go and do their morning prayers or whatever they're going to do. And maybe even when they hear the rooster, they say, and they say the bracha. Oh wow, look, there's these incredible. Although I never understood that, because when I've been in places, including right here, where there are roosters, they don't wait until the morning. You sometimes hear roosters absolutely crowing in the middle of the night. It's not this whole idea that roosters only crow right at dawn. It's not really true, is it? Anyone? You can hear them in the middle of the day. You can hear them in the middle of the night. I don't know.
Which also maybe goes to have another point towards the Haggadah version, which is that if you're just talking about laws all night, then it can be so boring that hearing a rooster every time you're going to be like, oh, is it morning yet?
Yeah.
But if you're in the story all night, you can be so engaged that you miss the rooster. And have to,
Beautiful.
Have a student come in and be like, what are you guys doing?
That's great. I was thinking something similar. Story is much more going to absorb you. Yeah. And I think that is the thing, the fact that the students have to come and tell them it says so much. I mean, on one way it's about relationship between students and teachers, it's between one generation and the next generation. Some of you will have heard or read commentaries that this whole story of these four rabbis in Bnei Brak was actually coded, and they were actually planning the Bar Kokhba revolt, and then the students came and it was all codified message. I don't know if that's true or not true, but there's something about students coming and telling you what to do. My teacher, it's time to go and say the Shema. You are so absorbed in this story, you've forgotten. Whereas the other rabbis somehow, all they've been doing, as Simon said, is like learning laws, and now they're going to go back and continue their learning. So the fact that the Haggadah text was the one that was chosen is perhaps emphasizing that storytelling as a spiritual practice is much more powerful than just learning halacha, right? And it's that fine relationship between halacha and Haggadah, between the details of law and the narrative pieces that come into it. Anything else? Why is it a good thing to just continue to tell stories? I mean, it says it again and again. It's like it's a praiseworthy thing to tell the story of the Exodus. It's part of the connection to seeing ourselves in the story in each generation. What is it? Yes.
Well, I think it's telling the story, but with a guide, the guidebook, which is the Haggadah. Because from research, we know that if you don't bring it up with structure, then each year you remember something, you degrade it, because bits and pieces of the present fill in, and so you don't remember as well, even though you think you remember the event. So what they did is they created a structure, the Haggadah, and an active participation, and between the two, that does build, consolidate memory. From memory research, and makes it relevant. So I think that they found a method of us to make this experience relevant throughout the generations in a very wise way, even though, of course, they didn't know the research on memory.
Maybe they did. I just think storytelling is an immensely important part of every spiritual tradition. Obviously, including ours, and I just think there's a way in which telling stories kind of accesses a deep core of who we are in the world, you know, and it reminds us who we are, reminds us what we're called to do, you know.
I think storytelling is an emotive process,
Yeah.
and there's a saying like, you won't remember what someone said, but you'll remember how they made you feel.
Yes.
And so the storytelling, I think, makes us feel as if we were in the story, and then helps us deal with similar challenges today,
Yeah.
knowing that we have this history.
Nice. Yeah. I want to, before we finish, just please, as I said, take these with you. It's an extraordinary collection of stuff in it, but one of which, and maybe we'll finish with, because I think the kind of sibling of storytelling is singing, right? They both have such a power to hit us in an emotive way, and there is an incredible piece in here by Joey Weissenberg. The section on the open door is really interesting in here. The thing about not eating chametz before Pesach, this midrash that if you eat matzah on Erev Pesach, it's like someone who has sex with their betrothed in their father-in-law's house. Pretty wild idea. But the Joey Weissenberg piece is, where is it?
19.
Yeah, on page 19, the obligation to sing after miracles. We won't look at it now, but if you want to look at that, it's really beautiful, the idea, because I don't think it's just after miracles, it's also when things feel pretty hard. But Jay, you're going to lead us in, would you like to lead us in a song of some kind?
Sure. Sorry, I'm getting distracted.
I know, I'm trying to pull you in. And
Totally.
get you to
Any song?
I think, or something that feels
Pesach
relevant.
related?
No, there's, yeah, Pesach related would be good.
You want more song? Let's sing our Hallel. I'm always wanting to sing our Hallel every day these days. Hallel, O Beit Yisrael. Hallel, O Beit Yisrael. Aneturim b'tzara, b'tzara u'b'shivya, העומדים בין בים ובין בים אחינו כל בית ישראל, אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה, בצרה ובשביה, עומדים בין בים ובין בים המקום ירחם, ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה, ממחנו לליאורה, ובשבו לרשתה, בגלה ובזמן קריב. ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה, מברה ומעפל עליונה, ומשבו לגאולה, השתה בגלה ובזמן קריב. אמן.